What if I told you that being a dedicated student, the kind of person who just quietly reads, takes really meticulous notes, and absorbs information, might actually be the exact behavior that's short-circuiting your brain's ability to understand any of it?
Yeah, it's a profoundly uncomfortable thought, right? Especially for anyone who really prides themselves on being a lifelong learner. But it goes right to the heart of what we are exploring today.
Exactly. So welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are pulling from a really fascinating philosophical text to tackle a mission that honestly just completely shatters how we typically think about education, communication, and, well, growth in general.
It really does. It flips the whole paradigm.
It does. We're exploring the idea that the teacher and the learner, they aren't two distinct identities. They
Right.
aren't these separate roles that you just step into and out of when it suits you.
Right. The text argues they are a single, fluid, completely inseparable process.
And as you're tuning in right now, listening to us, you probably consider yourself the learner in this dynamic. You hit play to gain some knowledge. But the concepts we're unpacking today issue a massive challenge to that kind of passive posture.
Yeah, the terminology in the text we're analyzing is actually incredibly stark. It proposes that the moment you separate the teacher from the learner, you sterilize the entire cognitive process.
Sterilize. That's an intense word.
It is. You take something that should be alive and dynamic and you turn it into a tool of separation. And that separation ultimately brings intellectual suffering rather than intellectual life.
I really want to challenge that, though, because sterilize and suffering, those are highly intense words for a person who is just, sitting quietly in a lecture hall or listening to an audio track on their morning commute.
Sure, it sounds a bit dramatic at first.
All right, I need to ground this a bit. I immediately thought about inhaling and exhaling. We treat learning and teaching like totally different hobbies. Like, I'm really focused on inhaling right now. I'm taking in all this oxygen. And maybe, when I'm older and wiser, I'll finally try exhaling.
I love that analogy because biology just doesn't work that way.
Exactly. You can't just choose to be an inhaler.
Hmm.
Your body literally requires the full cycle to metabolize the oxygen.
And that biological mechanism is the perfect lens for this philosophy. Think about what happens when you hold your breath. It isn't a neutral state.
No, you pass out.
Right. It's a
Yeah.
state of building toxicity. So to understand why this separation sterilizes the mind, we need to zoom in on the specific dangers of isolating that learner role.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here, because introverts everywhere, and I'm including myself in this, might absolutely hate this idea. Is solitary reading really a trap? Like,
Right.
if I read a recipe to make dinner, I just want to cook. I don't want to host a culinary masterclass.
Mm.
If I am just taking in information to use it, am I really sterilizing that knowledge?
So there is a distinct difference between practical utility and profound understanding. The text isn't really talking about following a recipe to bake a cake. It's talking about how we process complex ideas, philosophies, worldviews.
Okay, that makes sense.
The trap activates when you consume information without any intention of ever sharing it or synthesizing it for another human mind. When you are only a learner, you rob your brain of the metabolic process that's required to turn data into living knowledge.
Okay, what does metabolic process mean in a cognitive sense, though? Like, walk me through the actual mechanics of that.
Consider the illusion of competence. Let's say you watch, I don't know, 50 YouTube tutorials on how to build a wooden dining table.
Okay, I've definitely done things like that.
Right, we all have. You sit on your couch, you watch the carpenter measure, cut, and join the wood.
Yeah.
And in your mind, you feel incredibly competent. You've absorbed all this data.
I feel like a master carpenter from my sofa.
Exactly. But neurobiology tells us that because you haven't physically engaged with the material or, crucially, tried to explain those angles and measurements to someone else, your brain hasn't built robust neural pathways.
Hmm.
The information is actually super fragile.
It just sits there in short-term storage.
Yeah.
It reminds me of a pantry. It's like going to the grocery store, buying flour, sugar, and canned beans, and just stacking them on the shelves.
Yes.
You aren't actually metabolizing the food into energy. The cans just sit there, basically acting as a monument to the fact that you went to the store.
That is exactly it. And this leads to the most dangerous aspect of the isolated learner, which is the echo chamber effect.
Oh, interesting. How so?
When you consume without the burden of having to explain or defend those ideas to anyone else,
Yeah.
you develop this habit of compartmentalization.
You mean cherry picking what we want to hear?
It's far worse than just cherry picking, actually. You take complex, nuanced information and you force it into tiny, isolated boxes that already exist in your mind. The text points out that this behavior serves one very specific, very limiting purpose: to solidify your prior judgments. If you never have to communicate an idea, you never have to grapple with the parts of it that challenge your worldview.
Man, that hits uncomfortably close to home.
Mm.
I mean, think about modern behavior. We bookmark 500 articles we'll literally never read.
Oh, the endless bookmarks.
Right. Or we listen to 100 hours of audio just to quietly nod along to hosts who already agree with our political or social views. If I'm just reading an essay to myself and I hit a paragraph that causes cognitive dissonance,
You can just skip it.
exactly, I can comfortably skim past it. I don't have to resolve that friction.
Precisely. You just build a thicker wall around your existing biases. The original author's intent is completely lost because you sterilized the information. You stripped it of its ability to challenge you simply because you kept it entirely internal.
So the hoarding mentality keeps you comfortable, but it completely paralyzes your growth.
Mm.
Okay, so if hoarding knowledge to reinforce old biases is the intellectual trap for the isolated learner, let's pivot to the creators. We need to look at the other side of this, this severed dynamic.
The isolated teacher.
Right. What happens to the exhaler who refuses to inhale?
Well, the philosophical text is incredibly direct about the creator side of the equation. It asserts that if you attempt to teach without continuously learning, you are merely parroting dead ideas from the past.
Parroting dead ideas. That implies a total lack of original thought, like it's just an echo.
It is an echo.
But wait, if someone spent 20 years mastering a subject, aren't their ideas still valid even if they stop actively studying?
The text pushes back on that assumption heavily, and modern psychology backs it up too. It emphasizes that these past ideas you're parroting might never have even happened in reality.
Like, I don't follow that. How could the ideas never have happened? Like, if they lived through it or studied it extensively, it's a historical fact to them, right?
And because memory is not a video recording. Memory is a continuous reconstruction.
Oh, right.
Every single time you recall an event or a concept, your brain rebuilds it. If a teacher stops taking in new information, they stop calibrating their mental models against current reality.
Right. I see.
So over the years, their archived version of the world becomes increasingly warped by their own unmetabolized biases.
Oh, wow. Okay, I think we've all experienced this in the workplace.
Definitely.
You have that one out-of-touch manager who has been at the company for 20 years. They stopped learning new industry trends back in, like, 2015.
Yep.
And they stand up in meetings and dispense this supposedly golden wisdom about how the market works, but it's totally disconnected from the reality of 2026.
That is the perfect modern equivalent. That manager genuinely thinks they are bestowing vital truth. But without the constant intake of new learning, they have no vibrant living reality to offer. They're operating on a degraded signal.
They're essentially a tape recorder stuck on playback, broadcasting in an empty room.
A warped tape recorder, yeah.
Right. And because they aren't listening, because they severed the learner identity from themselves, they lack the self-awareness to even realize the tape is warped.
And this completely undermines how society assigns authority. We routinely grant authority to people simply because they hold the title of teacher or manager or expert.
Sure, the title does the heavy lifting.
Exactly. But this philosophy strips those titles of their inherent value if the continuous action of learning isn't present. The sterilization process destroys the teacher's relevance. It traps them in a fictionalized version of the past.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty grim picture of this separation. We have the isolated learner sitting quietly in a fortress of confirmed biases, hoarding canned goods.
Right.
And we have the isolated teacher standing on a soapbox shouting obsolete, fictionalized tape recordings into the void. Both are completely disconnected from reality. So how do we actually cure this sterilization?
We have to relink the biology. The text offers a profoundly active solution to bring information back to life. It's a reciprocal mandate.
Which,
Teach in order to learn, and learn in order to teach.
let's break those down.
Yeah.
Starting with teach in order to learn. I have to be honest. Society drills the exact opposite into our heads.
Oh, absolutely.
We are told we must achieve absolute mastery over a subject before we have the audacity to teach it to anyone else. Imposter syndrome is massive here. Like, how can I teach something when I'm still trying to figure it out myself?
You're touching on a massive cultural roadblock there, but the text dismantles that prerequisite entirely. It argues that the very act of preparing to teach is the mechanism that triggers the deepest learning.
Because it forces you to synthesize it.
Exactly. Think about the cognitive shift that happens when you know you have to explain a concept to another person.
Oh, you suddenly realize how many gaps are in your own understanding.
Precisely. When you organize your thoughts to make them coherent for another human brain, you can't just rely on that vague, hazy feeling of, oh yeah, I get the gist of this. The text explicitly states that paying attention to how you organize information to communicate it clearly is the very act that causes you to learn greatly, far more greatly than if you had remained a passive receiver.
Let me see if I can map this to an experience I've had. It feels very much like trying to translate a beautiful poem for a friend who speaks a different language.
That's a great way to look at it.
Because if I'm just reading the poem to myself in its original language, I might feel the emotion, I kind of vibe with the rhythm, and I convince myself I deeply understand it. But the second I try to translate it for my friend, I hit a massive wall.
Because you suddenly have to define the mechanics of the emotion, not just feel it.
Yes. I have to stop and ask myself, wait, why did the poet use this highly specific, slightly aggressive word for the ocean instead of a calm one? The sheer effort of trying to communicate the true, nuanced meaning to someone else forces me to dismantle the poem on a microscopic level.
You have to take it apart.
Exactly. I have to rebuild it from the ground up. And I would never have done that rigorous intellectual labor if I was just reading it on a Sunday afternoon for my own amusement.
And that translation effort is the literal definition of metabolizing knowledge. You are breaking down the complex proteins of the information, extracting the core nutrients, and restructuring them so they can be consumed by someone else.
Wow. Okay.
And here's where the second half of the mandate comes in. Learn in order to teach.
Meaning your primary motivation for taking in the information shifts.
Yes. When your default posture is, I am learning this so I can share it, you naturally avoid the hoarding trap.
Because you can't just skim past the hard parts.
Right. You can't skim past the paragraphs that cause cognitive dissonance because you know you have to present a comprehensive, honest picture to your audience. You remain open to the friction.
And it changes the whole texture of the interaction, too. It's no longer a transaction where I'm just handing you a static block of data that I memorized. Like if I'm translating the poem and my friend asked a question about a specific metaphor.
It shifts your perspective.
Exactly. Their question forces me to look at the poem from an angle I hadn't even considered. We are co-creating the understanding in real time.
Which brings us to the most profound and arguably the most beautiful revelation in the text. Once you begin metabolizing information this way, where the acts of teaching and learning are happening simultaneously, the boundary between the two roles doesn't just blur.
It completely dissolves.
It completely
The
dissolves.
text gets surprisingly intimate here, actually. It moves past just cognitive strategies and into the nature of human connection. It argues that when you teach, you're receiving just as much as you are giving.
The phrasing used is uncompromising. It says, the other's growth is your growth, literally.
Literally.
Yes. It explicitly states this is not a metaphor. If teaching and learning are a single metabolic ecosystem, then the expansion of the student's mind physically and intellectually expands the teacher's mind. The two outcomes cannot be separated.
That fundamentally flips the traditional power dynamic of education upside down.
Entirely. Think about the classic image of the lecture hall.
Right. The traditional view is very top-down. The teacher is this, benevolent, enlightened figure standing on a podium, generously bestowing the precious gift of knowledge down onto the empty, grateful student. It's a very ego-driven model.
It is. But the text shatters that ego by redefining what the gift actually is. It states that when a student is open to learn from you, they're the ones giving a great gift.
Right.
But crucially, the gift isn't theirs. The gift belongs to the teacher.
I need to wrap my head around that. The student is given the gift, but the gift belongs to the teacher.
Think of it this way. Without the student's willingness to be open, without them providing the physical and mental space for you to organize, articulate, and metabolize your own understanding, you would be stuck. You would be trapped holding your breath, hoarding canned goods, or parroting dead ideas. The student's openness is the catalyst that allows the teacher to survive intellectually. They are saving you from sterilization.
That is wild to consider. The vulnerability of the person saying, I don't know, teach me, is the actual engine that drives the expert's ongoing mastery.
Exactly. And the text closes the loop beautifully. It says that when you are the one learning, you are giving that exact same gift back. As you metabolize the information, process it, and prepare to share it again, the knowledge becomes vibrantly alive. There is no start point and no finish line, just a continuous flow.
Let's take a beat and synthesize this journey, because this completely changes the rules of engagement for how we interact with the world. We started by examining the danger of the labels we comfortably hide behind. We saw how isolating the learner turns into an illusion of competence, a hoarding of unchecked biases where information goes to stagnate.
And we saw how isolating the teacher leads to an arrogant decay, where creators lose touch with reality and broadcast warped historical fiction simply because they refuse to remain curious.
The only antidote to this intellectual sterilization is to engage the full biology of the mind, inhaling and exhaling. We have to take on the burden of translating and organizing information for others, because that friction is what actually builds deep comprehension.
Right.
The boundary dissolves. The student's openness is the ultimate gift that allows the teacher's mind to expand, proving that the other's growth is, quite literally, your own.
So, as we wrap up this exploration, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over on your own, building directly on this redefined concept of the gift.
Okay, let's hear it.
If you're very active learning, your willingness to expose your ignorance and be open is literally a life-giving gift to the authors you read, the mentors you follow, and the world around you. How does that change the way you interact with information today?
You are no longer just a sponge. You're the catalyst.
You are an active participant in an ecosystem that keeps knowledge alive. So whether it's a news article you read this afternoon, a complex conversation you have with a colleague, or even the philosophical concepts we've explored in this deep dive, what are you going to intentionally exhale into the world based on what you just inhaled?